The wind was cold that morning, the kind of cold that didn't just touch the skin but slipped straight into the bones, the kind that made the whole world feel heavier. The cemetery was silent except for the rustling leaves and the soft sound of someone sobbing, a sound so raw and broken that it seemed out of place among the carved stones and flowers. Kneeling at a grave was a thin young woman in worn clothes, her hands trembling as she clutched a small crumpled photograph to her chest. Tears flowed freely from her swollen eyes, and though her body shook from the cold, it was unmistakable that her real shiver came from grief, the kind that had lived inside her far too long. And from a distance, a tall, well-dressed man watched her carefully, confusion and sorrow shifting across his face as he stepped closer. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked slightly as he admitted something that made the young woman look up in shock. This grave she cried at, belonged to his wife. Fire before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of humanity, even from strangers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Whispers of Kindness. Your support helps us bring more real, emotional, life-changing stories to the world. From that moment, the story began not with anger or confrontation but with a quiet curiosity, a collision of two broken souls standing over the same resting place for two very different reasons. The young woman, whose name was Layla, struggled to breathe through her tears as she tried to apologize, as though grief needed permission. She explained that the grave was the only place she felt safe, the only place where she could speak her pain without being judged. She had always passed by the cemetery on her long walk home from the small diner where she washed dishes for minimum wage. For months, she had noticed the grave, covered in fresh flowers, always clean, always loved. And in her heart, she believed that someone buried there must have been a kind soul, someone who would listen if she poured out the sorrows she had never shared with anyone else. What she did not expect was that the one who loved this grave most, the one who placed those flowers daily, was watching her cry today. The millionaire, whose name was Daniel, had come every morning for nearly a year, always before sunrise, always leaving the same white lilies. His wife, Miriam, had died in a tragic accident, and though Daniel had everything money could buy, he had lost the only thing that made life feel alive. He never spoke at the cemetery, never asked questions, never interfered with anyone, until he saw Layla. Something about her brokenness mirrored his own, something about the way she cried reminded him of the nights he had spent alone in his massive house, where silence echoed louder than any voice. And so, quietly, he asked her what brought her to this grave. He expected a short answer, maybe embarrassment, maybe fear. But instead, what he received was a story he never could have imagined, one that would change both their lives forever. As Layla slowly stood up, she felt exposed, vulnerable, as if her entire life had been laid bare before a stranger. Yet something about Daniel's presence didn't frighten her, rather, it felt like an unexpected warmth, a rare sense of being seen. She told him that she had no family left. Her mother died when she was young, and her father walked out long before that, leaving her with a childhood that forced her to grow up far too soon. She worked wherever she could, lived wherever she found a spot, sometimes on friends' couches, sometimes in shelters, sometimes under the open sky. But what shattered her most wasn't poverty, it was betrayal. She had given years of her life to help someone she thought she loved, someone who promised to marry her, someone who promised a better future. But he used her, drained her, and left her with nothing, not even the roof she had been helping him pay for. When she confronted him, she was thrown out, her belongings tossed into the street like trash. The world felt cruel, and every night since, she found herself wandering, trying to convince her heart to keep beating. And then, one day, she passed by this grave. Something about the quiet stone, the flowers, the name, Miriam, etched into marble, it all drew her in. She talked to the stone as though it were her mother, her friend, her shelter. This grave became her hope. Daniel listened without interrupting, and with every word she spoke, a quiet ache tightened inside his chest. He had been surrounded his whole life by people who wanted something from him, business partners, investors, fake friends, and even distant relatives who pretended affection only to ask for favors. Yet here was a woman who wanted nothing from him. She had simply found comfort at the grave of a woman she never knew. Miriam would have liked this girl, Daniel could feel it. His wife had been warm, empathetic, always giving more of herself than she should. Layla reminded him of that same softness, that same unbreakable spirit hiding beneath bruises life had given. For days after their first meeting, they found themselves returning to the same grave at the same time. Not planned, not arranged, just two lost hearts gravitating toward the only place that felt safe. They talked about grief, about loneliness, about the cruel twists of fate that brought them both to this moment. Layla had never met someone who listened the way Daniel did, and Daniel had never met someone who made him feel human again. Slowly, something began to shift inside them both. The grave was no longer just a place of mourning, it became a place of healing. Daniel learned that Layla slept in an old, abandoned bus stop shelter on nights she couldn't stay with a coworker. She worked 2 jobs just to survive, her body aching from exhaustion yet her spirit fighting to stay alive. He learned she had dreams, simple dreams. A small room of her own. A warm bed, maybe one day, a chance to study, to become something more than what life told her she could be. And every time she shared these hopes, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, the desire to help someone not because he felt obligated, but because his heart insisted on it. But life doesn't change overnight. Even as Daniel began quietly helping, dropping off food near the diner, leaving warm blankets at the bus stop, slipping money anonymously into her bag, Layla still struggled. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, nights she felt unworthy of kindness, nights she questioned why a man like Daniel cared at all. And Daniel, while wanting to help openly, feared overwhelming her. He didn't want to seem like another man trying to control her life. He wanted her to feel strong, not indebted. Their bond grew slow, gentle, like the sunrise spreading softly over a dark sky. One night, everything changed. A storm rolled over the city, fierce and merciless, with rain that drenched the streets and wind that ripped through the air. Layla had no shelter that night. The diner closed early due to the weather, and the coworker she usually stayed with was out of town. She wandered through the storm, shivering violently, her clothes soaked through. When she reached the cemetery gate, she collapsed from exhaustion. She didn't know why she came there, maybe instinct, maybe hope. She curled beside Miriam's grave, crying not from pain this time, but from the fear that she would not survive the night. And then everything went dark. Daniel found her there hours later. He had felt restless that night, unable to sit in his warm mansion while the storm raged outside. Something in his heart told him to go to the cemetery, to check the grave. When he saw her lying there, unconscious, he rushed to her, lifting her gently into his arms. Her skin was ice cold, her breathing shallow. Without a second thought, he brought her to his home, the home that had once felt too big, too empty, too silent. For the first time in months, the house held life again. He took care of her as she recovered, brought her warm soup, clean clothes, a soft bed. When she woke, she cried, confused and overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Daniel told her she didn't need to leave immediately, that she could stay until she was strong again. But days passed, and she continued to grow healthier, happier, and more at peace in his home. She filled the quiet spaces with gentle laughter, with humble gratitude, with stories that made the house feel alive again. Daniel found himself smiling more, speaking more, breathing easier. Layla had unknowingly brought warmth back into a home that had been cold ever since Miriam died. Still, guilt gnawed at him. He worried that he was betraying his wife's memory, that allowing Layla into his life somehow meant replacing Miriam. But the more time he spent with Layla, the more he realized something important. Love wasn't about replacing someone. It was about honoring what they left behind by continuing to live, to feel, to hope. Miriam had been a giver, a healer. And Layla, broken, brave, beautiful in her resilience, was exactly the kind of soul Miriam would have wanted him to help. Weeks passed. Layla found steady footing again. With Daniel's support, she applied for courses at a local community college. He insisted only on one thing: that she pursue her dreams, not for him, but for herself. Her confidence grew as she started studying, working part-time at a kinder place, and slowly building the life she once thought impossible. And the best part, she never stopped visiting Miriam's grave. Only now, she visited with flowers of her own. Their bond evolved into something deep, something tender, something neither expected but both needed. Layla's presence softened Daniel's grief, and his kindness rebuilt her spirit. One day, as they stood before Miriam's grave together, Layla whispered her gratitude, not just to Daniel, but to the woman who unknowingly connected their lives. And for the first time since his wife's death, Daniel felt peace wash over him. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became meaningful again, for both of them. Yellow heart. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Whispers of Kindness. Your engagement truly keeps these emotional stories alive and helps them reach others who need hope. Before we end, Sparkle's special request: comment below what lesson from this story touched you the most. Your words may inspire someone else watching.